Assalamu alaikum, my friends, and welcome to my channel, Tales from the Road. Thanks so much for stopping by. If you clicked on this video, you're probably interested in the wildly interesting and mysterious Kingdom of Morocco. I just spent 2 months in this beautiful country, traveling from the north to the south, and I've put together this guide with everything you need to know before you go. So if that sounds good, let's do it. Yalla. Before we get into the content, I wanted to let you know that I am on Patreon. The link is up here. If you don't want to support the channel, a like and a subscribe would do wonders. So let's talk about Morocco. Let's do it. So now we're talking practical travel advice. So I figure it would be best to start with money because everybody needs to spend it and everybody needs to use it. So here we go. Moroccan dirham. This is the currency of Morocco. We have the beautiful King of Morocco on the front. We have the lovely Hassan II Mosque on the back. Right now, the Moroccan dirham is sitting at like, let's say around 9 to 1 USDs, and the country itself is not that expensive. The important thing to know is that Morocco is a very cash-based society, so you're gonna have to have cash with you, you're gonna have to use the ATMs, or you're gonna have to bring money to exchange. It's important to know that the ATM fee is pretty high if you have an international card. Sometimes I would be charged $4, sometimes I would be charged even up to $9 to use the ATM. That's no bueno. So I would recommend bringing cash to exchange, but just don't do it at the airport because they have the worst exchange rates, and in the country you'll get a much better deal. You can get away with using your card for certain things if you're doing, for example, excursions or you're eating at a fancy restaurant, but you're gonna need to have cash, and it's just part of the deal. So good things to know. So what should I bring on my trip to Morocco? Is there anything like special I need to know? Good question, Pierce. In Morocco, it's just very similar to a trip to Europe. Just the important thing to remember is that the weather is a bit different than I think people expect, because people see that it's a desert country, but in the winter it gets very cold, especially up in the mountains. So if you're going in the winter season, definitely bring a jacket. An umbrella would be good as it rains a lot also November, December, January, especially the more north you go. It gets very sunny, very, very hot, obviously in the southern part when you get into the Sahara portion of Morocco. So a hat and sunscreen, always really good things. If you're a woman traveler, realize that Morocco is also a conservative country in some ways. So if you're going into something like a mosque, which is not really that open because there's only 2 mosques in Morocco that are open, be aware that sometimes you're going to have a shawl so that you can actually go in and you don't need to like worry about buying a shirt. So other than that, totally normal place. And as far as what you should pack, that's kind of the be all end all of it. One thing to note is that Morocco uses the European charger. So if you're going to Morocco and you want to plug in, if you don't have that, get a converter. If you have it, your money. Visas. If you're traveling from the United States to Morocco, you don't need a visa. You can just show up with your passport. Good to go. If you're coming from other countries, especially Western European countries or English-speaking native countries, also same situation. You get between 60 and 90 days, and it's a really easy procedure. SIM cards. If you want to stay connected with family and friends in Morocco, it's actually really easy. You get 3 choices in telecommunications companies. You can do Inouï, you can do Morocco Telecom, you can do Orange. The data is pretty cheap, normally between $15 and $20 for quite a large amount of gigabytes of data. Sometimes it includes calling, sometimes it includes texting, depends what package you get. I found the speeds of the data in Morocco pretty good for the phones, pretty bad for the Wi-Fi. So if you're hoping to just rely on Wi-Fi, realize that hotels, restaurants and cafes sometimes don't have very good Wi-Fi or no Wi-Fi at all. So I think it's safer to get the SIM card. All you need to do is bring your passport, bring some cash, and you'll have a SIM card that connects you to the beautiful Moroccan telecommunications system. Now let's talk COVID. During my stay there, it would have been really hard for me to say that there was an international pandemic, as almost no one in Morocco wears masks, there was very little disinfection stations, and life was pretty much as it is, or as it was, pre-COVID 2020. If you are very cautious about COVID, that could be a nightmare for you, but if you don't really care about COVID, that could be the best news you've ever heard. The only thing is that the Moroccan government is very overly responsive to some things. So while I was there, for example, they just completely closed the borders and I almost got stuck. It didn't change any of the internal policy. There were no masking stations, there were no quarantines, there was no lockdown. but theoretically, like anything could happen. The King of Morocco really controls a lot of the policy, and if he wants something, it happens like overnight. So you just got to be kind of mobile and aware. And with the pandemic, that's an always changing scenario. If you do get sick, however, pharmacies are really easy and really available. The pharmacists don't always speak English, but if you know French or Spanish, really helpful. Arabic, an amazing language to know in Morocco, but you always can use your translator app. The over-the-counter medicine situation is great. They have most medicines, especially Western medicines and medicines from Western Europe. You can just show them what you want and they'll give it to you without a prescription. If you get really sick and you need to go to the hospital, you can do private hospitals or public hospitals. Private hospitals are of course more expensive, but decently available in any big city. If you're outside of a big city, for example, you're doing a trek in the Atlas Mountains, be aware that the medical system outside of big cities in Morocco is pretty few and far between. So definitely prepare if you need something, or even to have a first aid kit kind of ready for you, because just in any sort of developing nation, the medical system outside of big cities just isn't very prevalent. Language. How do I talk to these Moroccan people? Well, it's pretty simple. A lot of Moroccans, especially under the age of 30, speak English decently well. I wouldn't say it's the best English-speaking country out there, but you could find some people with some pretty good English language skills, especially those who study in university, as many Moroccans go to study in Europe or in the United States for better opportunities, as Morocco is a developing nation. Spanish is the language of the North, French is the language of the South and the rest of the country, but the main language, of course, is Darija, which is an offshoot of Arabic that has adapted French and Spanish traits. So, fun fact, if you're from Saudi Arabia and you come to Morocco, even though you speak Arabic fluently, you would have a really tough time speaking to the locals. So, many people are bilingual, trilingual, or even quadlingual, as Amazigh or Berber is another native language that of course is native to Morocco that predates Arabic. So you can find lots of people speaking lots of different language. It's one of the most multicultural countries I've been to with regards to language. But the good news is if you need to find someone to speak your language, you will find somebody. Safety. Is Morocco a safe country? Morocco is a really safe country. I think in any big city in the world, you need to be aware of pickpockets, of people doing devious things, but in general, Morocco is really safe. Guns are really strictly outlawed, so there's not a lot of gun crime, and the Moroccan people are very communal, so people aren't necessarily doing bad things to people that often. There are, of course, bad parts of every large city, but you, as a tourist, probably wouldn't be going there, so not something to worry about. Walking around at night, for example, in many major cities for a man, like as me, I felt totally normal, just same experience as pretty much anywhere else I've been in the world. As a woman, I have heard that men catcall women quite a bit and make them feel uncomfortable, especially at night. So that's definitely something to be aware of. It's just kind of a sad reality, but that is what it is. I would say overall, Morocco felt pretty safe. And especially even in really densely packed areas and in the Medina, which has really really small and narrow alleys, overall, I never felt unsafe at any moment. I think the biggest thing to worry about is just pickpockets and just to be aware of your cell phone, because I've heard stories of people getting their phone ripped out of their hand every once in a while as well. What about scams? Are there any scams I need to be aware of? Well, that's a solid question. I would say that I didn't experience any sort of scams that were obvious. When you go into the Medina, you have a big target on your back if you don't look Arab looking or Middle Eastern looking. People see you as a walking wallet, so they will come up to you sometimes in aggressive ways, trying to get you to buy someplace, trying to go into their store. The most basic advice I can give you is to make sure that you are strong, make sure that you only want to buy things you really want to buy, and to not give people money or show people money before you're willing to do anything, before there's an exchange of goods. So typically this won't happen in the newer parts of the city. People will typically leave you alone. But if you go to a tourist center, know that people will harass you for money. One of the larger scams that happens is children will come up to you looking for money. Typically these children are orphan children that are owned by some sort of group. So if you want to give money to children and support children, it's much better to find a orphanage or a charity which you can donate to rather than giving a kid on the street, 10 dirham or $1. If you really want someone who's pestering you to go away, you can speak a language or a fake language that they don't know. I found that was a good trick. Or you can put your hand on your chest like this. You can bow your head and you can say shukran and do this. I found that was a really good tactic because in the Arab world, that's a very traditional way to talk to each other. And if they see that you've adapted to that culture, they might think that you actually live in Morocco and they will leave you alone. If you just kind of keep walking, they will follow you. The second part of this is to always verify how much things are and always ask for a menu, for example. So for example, one time I was sitting in a cafe, I saw the menu and then they were trying to charge me about 30% more than the actual menu stated. I pulled up the menu and I counted it up and I said, here's the real price. And then they of course let me pay the normal price. It's just that they assumed I would be too lazy or I didn't know enough to change the price. So just don't let people confuse you. Stick to your guns and pay the correct amount. So let's talk about getting around the cities and taking day trips, traveling around the country. What are the best ways? Morocco has really good transportation, actually. Sometimes uncomfortable, but pretty good. The best news is that Morocco has the first high-speed railway system in all of Africa. So this starts north in Tangier and goes all the way to the south in Casablanca. It's really fast. It can go up to like 300 kilometers per hour. And it cuts down some serious travel time through some seriously tough terrain. If you want to go to other cities that are more in the mountains or more in the desert, like Marrakesh or Fez, you're going to need to take the traditional old train, which takes a bit longer. The carts are probably from the 90s or the early 2000s, so it's not so out of date to where it's kind of a disappointment, but it's a reality of traveling Morocco. You can take the bus, but the traffic in a lot of the major cities is really bad. And bus travel also has to go through the countryside roads, which sometimes are also not very good. One good way to travel between cities are shark taxis. Shark taxis you can see by this picture right here. And they are city-to-city taxis that charge a flat rate. Normally they're shared, you get in and you get one space. The funniest part about this is in a typical sedan, 3 in the back, 1 in front, they'll do 2 in front, 4 in the back. So if you want to pay for 2 seats, if you want to be a little bit more comfortable, that is definitely a way you could do it, because I will tell you it's not the most comfortable ride you've ever been on. Getting around in the cities is pretty easy. They have a car app called Karim. It's basically like Uber for the Arab world. So if you're in many major cities like Tangier, Rabat, or Casablanca, you'll be able to use this app. There are many taxis that you can find on the street that you can simply hail. You have to be a little bit aggressive to get them to stop, make sure that they see you. These are also shared taxis, so be aware that when you hail a taxi and you get in, it's not just for you. The taxis go in general directions and they pick up people on their way. It's very weird at first because this is not how taxis work at least in my part of the world, but it's actually very efficient and probably better for the ecosystem and environment. The taxi driver will keep account of how much you owe versus the rest of the passengers. And I've never actually had any problems with scam taxis, as I have in many other developing countries around the world. So I would say Moroccan taxis are very safe, very easy. They just might take longer because they don't necessarily go direct, because you have multiple people going to multiple destinations in one direction as opposed to you going directly in your direction. If you want to rent the whole taxi, you can, but the taxi drivers don't always speak English. Get ready to use some French or some Spanish, depending on what city you're in. So let's talk now about the Moroccan people. Who are the Moroccan people, and can you interact with them? Well, the Moroccan people are an interesting blend between Amazigh local culture and Arab culture that has come in through years of intertrade between the region of North Africa and the Middle East. The people of Morocco are so nice, so generous, and don't be surprised if they invite you into their home, invite you into their store for a cup of tea, to chat, to talk, and to make you feel welcome. In Moroccan culture, they are a welcoming culture, and they have this old sort of traveler comfort. So they make sure that foreigners feel welcome and feel comfortable. And they're very easy to talk to. My favorite thing in Morocco is watching people interact. You'll see some of the world's longest handshakes. You'll see lots of this, you'll see lots of kissing, you'll see lots of smiles. And if you walk around with a local person and you need to go to a destination, don't be surprised if you stop 1, 2, 3, or 4 times with him talking, chatting, getting free food, something of the like. I noticed that people in certain neighborhoods, it seemed like everybody knew each other, and it's a very familial country. So I kind of love this vibe. It's something very different than what we have in the United States. Everyone kind of is in a bunch, and everyone really knows each other. So that's a great news about the Moroccans. I find it really easy to make Moroccan friends. They're very friendly people. So if you speak some English, or you speak some Spanish, or you speak some French, you can really go up and just talk to people, and the majority of them will be very happy to chat. It's a very extroverted culture. Although if someone comes up and talks to you out of the blue, probably they're not doing it for just the reason of making friends. They probably want something from you. So I would say avoid those people. If you are talking with a Moroccan person, they're very open people, and they are very happy to talk about many different topics with you. What I wouldn't recommend talking about is the King of Morocco. Just leave it alone. Not really an important topic for you. Everybody has their opinion in the country, but it's not really yours to say much about it. I've had videos where I've talked about the King of Morocco, and I've gotten a lot of flack on the internet. So I would just recommend not talking about the Kingdom of Morocco. And the secondary part is don't talk about Western Sahara in any sort of negative way, or any sort of independent way. Pretty much every Moroccan I talked to was very adamant that Western Sahara is a part of Morocco. And no matter what the international community says, that's not going to change their mind. So I wouldn't talk about that as well. Those are the two taboo talks. I would also say Islam is an interesting thing to talk about with Moroccans, and especially to get their opinion on how it's changed in their country over time. As I've heard, it's been getting more conservative and less kind of mystical as it used to be in the past. Some practical Moroccan language advice would be my favorite words that I got to use a lot in my stay in Morocco. Assalamu alaikum. It means peace be upon you. It's a greeting that they use all over the Islamic world. You can also say marhaba, which means hello, but it also means welcome, and you'll hear lots of people saying marhaba pretty much anytime you interact with them. Another good one is bisaha, which is something like cheers or to your health or something. So you hear people say that a lot when you're eating. And the last thing you can learn to say is shokran bisef, which is something like thank you very much. It's very formal, but if you say it, people seem to get very excited about it. So those would be my little Darija words. If you know some French or some Spanish, you can also mix it in there, and you can find if you hear people speaking in the Moroccan Arabic, you can hear a lot of words that you know, because there's lots of foreign influence over the years of colonization and colonial influence. Whew! All right, so practical information done. Now I'm gonna give you guys some recommendations, things that you should definitely try, things that are probably worth skipping, and my overall impression of Morocco. I think Morocco as a tourist destination has a little bit for everyone. They have a massive coastline, so if you're kind of a beach guy or you like to go surfing, there is lots of places for you, like Essaouira, beautiful beach town, or Tagazout, an absolutely amazing place to go surfing. The northern coastline that borders the Mediterranean is something totally different. So you could go to Oujda, or you could go to Al Hoceima, or you could go to Tangier. Very different vibes, and they all have this kind of coastal vibe. The secondary part is that if you want to go to the desert, there are amazing Sahara regions you can go to. So of course you can start in Marrakesh. You can go to the very famous Merzouga, which is kind of the Moroccan kind of outpost where people do camel tours through the Sahara. But if you talk to a lot of Moroccans, they recommend that you go down to Western Sahara and go to a city called Dakhla, which is a beautiful beach resort town, very similar to, let's say, Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt. They have really massive dunes that go directly onto the beautiful Atlantic coast. And it was the one place that every time I said, where should I go to many different Moroccans, everybody recommended Dakhla. So that's an interesting and let's say less known spot that you can definitely take a trip to. I would say my highlight in Morocco, the places that I went, was actually Rabat. It was just surprising because I assumed because it wasn't like one of the biggest tourist cities that it would be a little bit boring or there wouldn't be a good reason to go there. But I found that it was an amazing city and something so fantastic. In contrast, I thought Marrakesh was going to be a lot better than it actually was, in my opinion. I enjoyed my time in Marrakesh because they have very interesting riads and it has that sort of desert lifestyle. But I found the city to be very touristy and much less enjoyable and much less authentic than a city like Casablanca or a city like Rabat. So every city in Morocco has really amazing things, palaces, riads, historical sites, museums. Each place is unique in its own right. And the cool part about Morocco is it has a lot of historical differences depending on the region. So Tangier has a very different story in the north than Dakhla does in the Sahara South. It's just a country with so much to offer. So I would say, basically there's no good or bad places. Each place is very different in its own right. And if you want to get off the grid as well into the Sahara or into the Atlas Mountains, those are things you can do as well. So endless amounts of things to do in Morocco. And I think that's the best part about the country. Now we're going to do the love-hate section. So love the mosques. Some of the most beautiful and creative mosques that you can see anywhere in the world. They're so stunning. Hate that foreigners can't go in them. Foreigners can only go in 2 mosques in the entirety of Morocco, and they're very expensive, and you can't even go in the full day because the prayers prevent you from going in. So if you stumble into a mosque, you'll probably be asked to leave. So that's a big love and hate for me. Love the street food culture in Morocco. You can find some amazing and highly diverse street food that are cooked by some master street food preparers and some amazing chefs. But hate that in some cities, street food is not prevalent, and in other cities, street food is everywhere. So living in Tangier, not much street food to be found, but if you go to Fez, street food everywhere. It really depends where you're at. So I found that to be kind of a sad thing as a big foodie. Love that Morocco is such an interesting, diverse, and very large country with so much to offer, and hate that it's such a large country, so you really need a lot of time to be able to explore it properly. The distances between the cities are not gigantic, but from the top to the bottom, we're talking 8 to 10 hours of travel time. If you want to go to Western Sahara, you're probably going to have to end up flying there. And if you want to go to the Sahara region, like Merzouga, it's like very far away from cities. So it requires a lot of patience, but also a lot of time. So love that there's so much to see, but hate that I have to keep coming back to Morocco. But also that's probably a good thing because it's a unique country that I'm sure many people would be happy to come back time and time again for. So let's talk food. As a big foodie, I would say Morocco is a very interesting country, and the food was not exactly what I imagined. As a foreigner, I would say that couscous is the dish that comes to mind the most when you're thinking of Moroccan food. But the funny part is they really only eat it one day out of the week. Friday, after the Islamic prayer services, the kind of opening of the Islamic Sabbath, everyone goes around 2 p.m. to go get a big plate of couscous topped with chicken or with beef. It's absolutely delicious. They drink it with kind of like a yogurt drink, and it's really good, but I would not say it's the highlight of the Moroccan food experiences. Also, tagines, the traditional clay pot dish of Morocco, can be found everywhere all the time. They're pretty simple. Some can be a little bit more royal, depending on the ingredients, but I also wouldn't say that they were my highlight. The highlight was certainly the food that's cooked in people's homes, so if you can get that experience, I would. And I noticed the tagines that were made by my friend's wife were much better than the tagines that were made by some dude in a restaurant. That's kind of obvious, it's kind of a given. The surprise for me was the amount of seafood that the Moroccans eat. For whatever reason, when I think of Moroccan food, I just think of the desert. So it's not really what I'm picturing. But the highlight for me was the fried fish, the sardines, the fresh shrimp, and the fantastic spicy sauces you can dip them in. It's a place that's really diverse with food and has a lot of fast food options. I noticed the Moroccans really enjoy the old fast food. The secondary part is the bar culture, which I think is very interesting. It seems like the bars are very acceptable because it's a very, let's say, open country, but because it is an Islamic kind of country as well, there's this sort of kind of hush-hush judgment about it all. So there's two types of bars that you can find. There's the one bar that's like a traditional normal bar that you would find lots of young people, loud music, people smoking inside, people having beers, hanging out, dancing, very normal. And then there's the secondary bars, which are like a bunch of men in their 40s who look like they're avoiding something at home. Most of them are at a table drinking by themselves in kind of a dark room. And there's also like pretty rampant prostitution in these bars. So the majority of the women are just prostitutes. So it's just a weird sight. I've went with some friends a couple times. It's very fun because they play with traditional Moroccan music as opposed to, you know, like club music or something like that. But the whole vibe kind of feels a little bit like a whole bunch of people like being naughty. I don't know how else to phrase that. It's very funny, and it's something that I really enjoyed seeing. And I haven't seen it really in any other country sort of like that, because countries where alcohol is prohibited, it's prohibited. In countries where it's free, it's free. In Morocco, it's like free, but like a lot of people shouldn't be doing it. That was the impression that I got. Whew. All right, guys, I think we covered a lot of ground. We talked about the food, we talked about the people, we talked about what you need to bring, we talked about some of my favorite places, the transportation, and everything in between. So if you have any questions related to Morocco, feel free to drop a comment below. I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. You can write me personally via email as well. Very happy to answer your questions. I might do a podcast about this as well, which will be a live stream, so you can of course participate, and I look forward to engaging with you guys. I loved my time in Morocco. It's one of the most unique countries that I've been to. It's just deeply historical and deeply interesting, with so much contrast in the way that people live, the stories that you can have, and that's what makes it so damn special. So don't forget to use your Moroccan dirhams, buy a jalaba, one of those like cloaks that the traditional men wear, and to have some couscous on your adventure in the wonderful Kingdom of Morocco. If you liked the video, make sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. We're gonna do some more in-depth travel guides for many countries around the world, and I look forward to sharing them with you. So thank you guys for watching. If you made it this far, you guys are legends. Bisaha, assalamu alaikum, and of course, marhaba. We'll see you in the next one. Ciao.